Once upon a time the sacred bond and the prince's doubt. In the heart of the Great Plains, where the river met the golden fields, lay the village of Otaro. It was a land of peace and prosperity, ruled by the wise and just King Eobi. The people of Otaro believed their fortune was tied to an ancient spirit, the Golden Serpent. For generations, they offered tributes beneath the full moon, receiving wisdom, fertile lands, and protection in return. Yet not all believed in the serpent's power. Among the skeptics was Prince Obina, the only son of King Eobi. He was strong and clever but dismissed the traditions that bound his people. A serpent controls our fate, he scoffed. It is mere superstition. His father warned him of the consequences of doubting forces beyond human understanding, but Obina refused to listen. On the night of the full moon, the village gathered at the sacred altar. Dancers twirled in rhythmic steps, elders whispered prayers, and gifts of gold and fruit were placed in the serpent's honor. The air pulsed with energy, yet Obina watched from the shadows, unimpressed. Determined to prove his doubts right, he devised a bold plan. That night, when the village slept, he crept into the sacred cave. He carried a clay pot, its lid adorned with sealing runes. With careful steps, he approached the altar deep within, where the golden serpent coiled, its scales shimmering like molten sun. Obina's heart pounded as he lifted the pot. The serpent raised its head, locking its golden eyes onto the prince. A deep voice echoed in his mind. You do not understand the bond you break. Ignoring the warning, Obina struck swiftly, capturing the spirit within the pot and sealing it shut. He grinned in triumph. Now, let us see who truly holds the power, he whispered, carrying the imprisoned serpent away, unaware of the doom he had set in motion. The curse begins. The morning after the full moon ceremony, an eerie silence hung over Otaro. The sky, once bright and golden with the promise of a new day, was now suffocated by thick, grey clouds. The sun, usually a fierce guardian over the land, was hidden behind an unnatural gloom. The air felt heavy, as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath and refused to exhale. At first, the villagers dismissed it as an unusual shift in the weather, but soon, the signs of misfortune began to multiply. The river that had always run clear and fresh now flowed sluggish and dark, its surface coated with an oily sheen. Fishermen returned with empty nets, their usual bountiful catches reduced to nothing. The crops, which had stood tall and green just a day before, began to wither as though some unseen force was draining the life from them. The people of Otaro whispered among themselves, their voices laced with fear. Have we angered the spirits? Did we not offer enough at the ceremony? Where is the golden serpent? The honey spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of King Eobi and his council of elders. The king, who had seen many seasons pass, had never witnessed such calamity before his land. He gathered the elders in the great hall, the flickering torches casting uneasy shadows on their faces. Something has disturbed the sacred balance, he said, his voice grave. This is no ordinary misfortune. We must seek the truth before our people suffer further. The villagers, desperate for answers, hurried to the sacred cave with fresh offerings of fruit, gold, and woven silks. But when they arrived, their worst fears were confirmed, the golden serpent was gone. The altar was cold, the air stagnant, devoid of the energy that had once pulsed through the cave like a heartbeat. Cries of distress echoed through the stone chamber. The spirit has abandoned us. Who would dare commit such a crime? The elders knelt before the empty altar, their foreheads pressed against the ground in sorrow. Obina stood among the crowd, his face carefully neutral, though inside, he brimmed with a quiet triumph. He had proven his point. The mighty serpent had been nothing more than a creature bound by the beliefs of men. And now, he alone held its power, locked away in the clay pot hidden deep within his chambers. He watched the people's fear with cold detachment, telling himself that soon, they would see that they had placed their faith in myths. But his confidence began to waver when an unfamiliar presence arrived in the village. As the villagers lamented at the cave, a woman stepped forward from the shadows. She was cloaked in deep blue robes, her presence commanding yet strangely comforting. Her dark eyes glowed with wisdom beyond mortal years, and her ebony hair flowed like a river in the windless air. She introduced herself as Nera, a wanderer and keeper of ancient knowledge. "The balance of this land has been broken," she declared. "And I have come to restore it." The people, desperate for hope, gathered around her. "Tell us, wise one, what must we do?" Nera studied their faces before speaking. "The Golden Serpent did not abandon you of its own will. It has been taken by the hands of one among you." A hush fell over the crowd. "The one who has done this must step forward and face the consequences, or your suffering will only deepen." Murmurs spread like ripples on a disturbed pond. Suspicion flickered in the eyes of the villagers, but none dared to accuse their neighbors. Obina felt a prickle of unease. His hands clenched at his sides as Nera's gaze swept over the crowd until her piercing eyes landed on him. "Prince Obina," she called, her voice calm yet unyielding. "You carry a great burden on your soul." The crowd turned toward him, confusion and curiosity mingling in their expressions. Obina forced himself to scoff. "You dare accuse me? On what grounds?" Nera stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "Because the weight of guilt bends even the proudest back. And I see it in you." Obina's heart pounded. He had prepared himself for many things, but not for this woman's unsettling presence, nor for the way the truth seemed to coil around him like an inescapable shadow. The whispers of the villagers grew louder. His father's gaze, filled with expectation, burned into him. For the first time since sealing the serpent away, Obina felt the enormity of what he had done. The air around him seemed to thicken, pressing against his chest like unseen hands. With the village watching, with the skies darkening further, and with the crops withering under his very feet, there was no escape. The prince swallowed hard, then exhaled a shaky breath. "I took the serpent," he confessed. A gasp swept through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. King Eobi closed his eyes, his expression unreadable. The elders bowed their heads in grief. The villagers stared at Obina, their disbelief quickly turning to anger. Nera remained silent for a moment, then simply nodded. "Then the path to redemption begins." The prince, once so sure of his own wisdom, now stood before his people with a sinking realization he had unleashed a force beyond his understanding. And the price had yet to be paid, the journey to redemption. The revelation of Obina's betrayal shook the village to its core. The villagers, once loyal to the prince, now turned their anger toward him. Shouts filled the air, each voice rising in fury and disbelief. "He has brought this curse upon us. He must be punished for his crimes. We trusted him, and now we suffer." Obina stood in the center of the village square, his body rigid, his face pale as the villagers' harsh words lashed out like whips. He tried to speak, but no words would come, for he knew there was nothing he could say to undo the harm he had caused. His once proud chest now felt hollow, as though the weight of the villagers' disappointment was too much to bear. King Eobi, silent until now, looked down at his son with a mixture of sorrow and anger. He had raised Obina with love and discipline, believing he was preparing him to one day take his place as ruler. But now, the king felt the sting of betrayal, not just from his son, but from the very foundation of their traditions. "Father," Obina whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Please, tell them it wasn't my intention. I thought I could prove that we didn't need the serpent." His voice faltered as the realization sank deeper. "I didn't understand." The king shook his head slowly. "You have broken a sacred bond, my son. And now, the land is paying the price." Nera, who had been quietly observing the unfolding scene, stepped forward. Her eyes, filled with ancient wisdom, met the king's. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady and firm. "Obina's punishment is not for the village to decide. The Golden Serpent's wrath cannot be appeased through anger alone. It is only through his own actions that balance may be restored." The king looked at her, uncertainty in his eyes. "What do you suggest, Nera?" "That my son embark on a quest for forgiveness. The serpent has already been taken from us, and our land suffers." "Not all is lost," Nera replied. "The serpent's power still exists, though it has been tainted by Obina's actions. If he is to undo the curse, he must face the spirit he betrayed. The trials he must undergo will test his very soul. If he succeeds, the curse may lift, and balance may be restored." The villagers were quiet now, their anger simmering beneath the surface. They watched as the king considered Nera's words, his brow furrowed with the weight of the decision. After a long pause, King Eobi spoke, his voice heavy with authority. "Obina," he said, his gaze unwavering, "you will leave at once with Nera and find the Golden Serpent. You will face the trials that await you, and only then will we know if you are truly worthy of redemption." Obina's heart sank, but there was no room for protest. With a final, resigned look at his father, he nodded. "I understand." And so, the prince embarked on the journey that would change his life forever. The path to the deep forest was not one that many villagers ventured. It was said to be a place where the veil between the mortal realm and the spirit world was thin, where the earth pulsed with ancient magic. The trees grew tall and dense, their leaves forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Strange, otherworldly sounds echoed from the shadows, and the air felt thick with the weight of forgotten secrets. Obina walked in silence beside Nera, his mind consumed by fear and uncertainty. The weight of his actions hung heavily on him, but with each step, he also felt the stirrings of something else, a glimmer of hope that redemption was still possible. It was strange. He had once dismissed the legends and traditions of his people as mere superstition, but now, as he ventured deeper into the forest, he began to sense that the power of the serpent was very real. As they walked, Nera spoke little, her eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced caution. The forest seemed to whisper around them, the wind carrying faint echoes of words that Obina could not quite understand. It was as if the trees themselves were aware of his presence, watching him with silent judgment. Hours passed before they finally reached the clearing where the sacred cave had once stood. Now, all that remained was a circle of broken stones, scattered and half-buried beneath the roots of ancient trees. The altar was gone, and the air felt charged with an unsettling energy. Obina's heart raced. "The serpent, it should be here." Nera nodded, her expression solemn. "The serpent is not bound to one place. It is a being of spirit and force. But here, you will find the first sign of your failure." As Obina stepped forward, he saw it, fragments of the clay pot that had once contained the Golden Serpent. It was shattered, its pieces scattered across the forest floor, a symbol of the prince's reckless actions. The serpent had broken free, and now, its fury had taken root in the very land. A low hiss filled the air, so deep and rumbling that it seemed to shake the ground beneath their feet. The sound was primal, ancient, and full of wrath. Obina froze. His blood ran cold. From the shadows, a shape began to emerge, a great, shimmering serpent, its golden scales glinting in the dim light of the forest. Its eyes glowed with a fiery intensity, and its body coiled with a grace that belied its anger. The Golden Serpent, once a creature of wisdom and prosperity, now radiated fury. Its voice, when it spoke, was like thunder. "Prince Obina," it hissed, its gaze fixed on him with an intensity that pierced through to his very soul. "You have betrayed me. You have broken the sacred bond that sustained this land." Obina fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the serpent's presence. "Please, I I didn't understand. I thought I could prove. Silence, the serpent roared. Your ignorance has caused suffering to your people. And now, you must prove that you are worthy of redemption. Only then will the curse be lifted. Only then will you restore balance to this land. Obina's heart hammered in his chest. What must I do? The serpent's eyes narrowed. You must face 3 trials. 3 tests of your heart, your mind, and your spirit. If you succeed, the curse will be undone. But if you fail, the land will wither, and your people will suffer forever. The ground trembled as the serpent's form swirled around Obina, its enormous body encircling him like a living storm. The first trial had begun, and Obina was no longer sure if he was ready for the challenges ahead. But he had no choice now. He had made his bed, and he would lie in it. The path to redemption had been set. And Obina could only hope that he was strong enough to walk it, the 3 trials, truth and courage. Obina stood before the Golden Serpent, the weight of his past mistakes pressing against him like an unseen force. The serpent's golden scales shimmered with an ethereal glow, its coiled form towering over the prince like an ancient guardian of fate. The forest around them pulsed with energy, as if the very land itself was waiting to see if Obina was worthy of redemption. The first trial, the serpent hissed, its voice like the rustling of 1,000 leaves, is the trial of truth. Step forward, Prince Obina, and face yourself. Obina swallowed hard as the ground beneath him shifted, revealing a circular pool of water so still that it reflected the sky above like a polished mirror. The pool of reflection, as it was called in legends, was said to reveal the deepest truth of those who dared to look into its depths. He had once scoffed at such stories, believing them to be the superstitions of the elders. Now, he knew better. Nera, standing at the edge of the clearing, met his gaze with calm certainty. Do not resist what you see, she advised. The pool does not lie, and only those who accept their truth can pass. Taking a deep breath, Obina stepped into the water. It was cold, unnaturally so, sending a shiver through his entire body. As he waded in deeper, the water began to ripple, distorting his reflection. Then, the surface darkened, and a vision appeared before him. He saw himself, proud, arrogant, dismissing the wisdom of his people. He saw his hands sealing the clay pot, trapping the golden serpent for his own selfish gain. He saw the land suffering, the rivers poisoned, the crops withering, all because of his recklessness. But worse than that, he saw the faces of his people, their disappointment, their fear, their loss of faith in him. Shame washed over him like a wave. I was blind, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted power. I thought I knew better than generations before me. I saw our traditions as chains, not as the wisdom that kept us whole. The water stirred again, the images fading. In their place, he saw himself kneeling before his father, begging for understanding. He saw himself tending to the sick villagers, carrying water to dry fields, rebuilding what he had helped destroy. I was greedy, he confessed. And I was wrong. The moment the words left his lips, the water began to clear. The cold faded, replaced by a warmth that spread through his limbs. When he looked down, he saw his reflection once more, unbroken, whole. The golden serpent's voice rumbled with approval. You have acknowledged your fault. The burden of truth is heavy, yet you have borne it well. You may proceed. Obina stepped out of the pool, his clothes miraculously dry. He felt lighter, as though he had shed a great weight. But he knew this was only the beginning. The second trial, the serpent continued, is the trial of courage. Ahead lies a cave of darkness, where a guardian awaits. You must retrieve the heartstone hidden within, but beware, the guardian will not surrender it easily. Obina nodded, determination hardening his resolve. Nera offered him a reassuring look before motioning to a jagged opening in the mountainside just beyond the clearing. He stepped forward into the darkness. The cave swallowed him whole, the dim light at its entrance quickly fading behind him. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something primal. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears, the echoes making the space feel even more cavernous than it was. Then, a low growl cut through the silence. Obina froze. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the shadows ahead, followed by the sleek, powerful form of a great black panther. Its muscles rippled beneath its dark fur as it slunk forward, its movements effortless, predatory. The hearthstone glowed faintly on a pedestal behind the beast. For a moment, fear rooted Obina to the spot. He had no weapon, no means of fighting the creature. His instinct screamed at him to run. But then, he remembered Nera's words. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Obina took a slow breath, steadying his nerves. The panther's yellow eyes locked onto him, unblinking. He could see the tension in its body, the readiness to strike at any moment. Fighting was not the answer. If he attacked, the beast would fight back, and he would surely lose. But if he could prove that he was not a threat. Moving carefully, he crouched down and extended his hands, palms open in a gesture of peace. I do not wish to harm you, he murmured. I only seek the stone. The panther did not move. Its tail flicked once, ears twitching as if considering his words. Slowly, Obina reached into the pouch tied to his waist and pulled out a strip of dried meat, one of the few supplies he had brought with him. He laid it on the ground between them, then sat back on his heels, waiting. The panther sniffed the air, then cautiously padded forward. It lowered its head, its sharp teeth flashing as it grabbed the offering. Obina stayed still, his heart pounding. The beast chewed, then looked at him again, this time without hostility. It let out a deep exhale, then, as if satisfied, stepped aside. Obina barely dared to believe it. Keeping his movements slow, he approached the pedestal and lifted the hearthstone. The moment his fingers touched it, a warmth spread through his palm, and a faint pulse, like a heartbeat, resonated from the stone. He turned back to the panther. It watched him, unblinking, before turning and vanishing into the shadows. Obina exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. When he emerged from the cave, the Golden Serpent was waiting. You did not kill the guardian, the serpent observed. You did not let fear dictate your actions. Obina met the serpent's gaze. I have caused enough harm. I wish to heal, not destroy. The serpent's eyes gleamed with approval. You have shown bravery. The second trial is complete. Obina clenched the hearthstone in his fist, feeling a newfound strength within him. 2 trials down. One remained, the trial of sacrifice. The air was thick with tension as Obina stood before the Golden Serpent, the hearthstone still warm in his grip. He had faced his own truth and proven his courage, yet he knew the hardest test still lay ahead. The serpent's golden scales shimmered under the dim forest light, its eyes reflecting the weight of ancient wisdom. The final trial, the serpent announced, its voice deep and commanding, is the trial of sacrifice. Obina's heart pounded. He had expected another battle, another test of strength. But the serpent's words sent a chill down his spine. To restore balance, the serpent continued, you must relinquish that which you cherish most. Only then shall the curse be lifted. Obina frowned. What must I give? The serpent's gaze bore into him. Your title, your birthright. You must renounce your claim to the throne. A stunned silence filled the clearing. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for his response. Obina's breath hitched. His title as prince had defined his entire life. Since childhood, he had been raised to rule, to carry on his father's legacy. Every lesson, every expectation, every moment had been leading him toward the throne. And now, he was being asked to cast it all aside. His hands curled into fists. There must be another way. There is not, the serpent said. You sought power for yourself and, in doing so, endangered your people. Now, you must surrender that power to save them. Obina turned, his gaze searching for Nera. She stood quietly, watching him with knowing eyes. She did not speak, but she didn't need to. He already knew the truth. He thought of the village, of the children with hollowed eyes, of the elders who had prayed for relief. He thought of his father, King Eobi, who had always ruled with wisdom and kindness. His father had placed his people above all else. Could he do the same? He swallowed hard, his throat tight. Once you give up the throne, the serpent continued, you will never reclaim it. You will live as a common man. You will not rule, nor will you bear the privileges of royalty. Obina clenched his jaw. He had always imagined himself as king, guiding his people into the future. Yet, looking back, he realized that his arrogance had blinded him to what true leadership meant. It wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. And now, it was his responsibility to make things right. His decision settled within him like a heavy stone. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, then exhaled with resolve. I accept. A hush fell over the clearing. The weight of his words echoed in the stillness. The serpent's golden body coiled tightly, then relaxed. Speak the words, Prince Obina. Obina swallowed the lump in his throat. He had been addressed as the prince his entire life, but this would be the last time. I, Obina, son of King Eobi, renounce my title and my claim to the throne. From this moment forward, I am no longer Prince of Otaro. The words felt foreign, strange on his tongue. Yet, as he spoke them, a warmth spread through his chest, not loss, but clarity. The serpent flicked its tongue, tasting the air, then lifted its head high. It is done. A deep rumble shook the ground. The sky, which had been shrouded in endless darkness, suddenly cracked open with light. Golden rays of sunlight spilled over the land. The poison rivers shimmered as their waters turned clear once more, rushing freely to nourish the soil. The withered crops straightened, their green returning in full, lush waves. The village of Otaro, once on the brink of ruin, was reborn before his very eyes. A gust of wind carried the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Obina turned, watching as birds took flight once more, their songs filling the air. The curse had been lifted. Obina exhaled, relief washing over him. But beneath that relief was an unfamiliar feeling. An emptiness where his title had once been. He was no longer a prince. No longer heir to the throne. And yet, for the first time in his life, he felt free. The Golden Serpent regarded him with something that almost resembled approval. You have done what many could not. You have sacrificed power for the greater good. That is true strength. Obina met its gaze and bowed deeply. His journey was not over. He had much to learn, much to atone for. But for now, he had taken the first step toward becoming the man he was truly meant to be. A new beginning and a lesson learned. As Obina approached the village, the weight of his journey still clung to him like a heavy cloak. His steps were slow, his heart uncertain. He had left as a prince filled with arrogance and pride, but he returned as a man who had seen the depths of his own flaws. The villagers gathered at the edge of Otaro, their faces weary, their eyes filled with questions. They had suffered under the curse, and Obina had been the cause. Would they ever forgive him? King Eobi stood at the forefront, his regal posture firm, yet his gaze unreadable. His son, who had once scoffed at tradition and sought power for himself, now stood before him stripped of all titles. Obina dropped to his knees, bowing his head. I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I will spend my life earning it. Silence hung over the crowd. Then, a murmur. An elder stepped forward, her wrinkled hands gripping a staff. "The curse has been lifted," she said softly. "The land is healed. Our people are safe." A young boy, no older than 10, stepped closer. "And you gave up everything to save us?" Obina swallowed hard. He had expected anger, scorn, but in their faces, he saw something else. Understanding. Slowly, one by one, the villagers nodded. Some stepped forward, placing hands over their hearts in a silent gesture of respect. "We all make mistakes," a farmer said. "But few have the courage to right them." A rush of warmth filled Obina's chest. He had feared rejection, but instead, he had found acceptance. King Eobi remained silent, watching his son with an unreadable expression. Then, after a long pause, he stepped forward and placed a hand on Obina's shoulder. "You have changed," the king said. His voice was strong, but there was something softer beneath its pride. "Once, you sought power for yourself. Now, you understand what it truly means to serve." Obina lifted his head, meeting his father's gaze. "I do, father. I was blinded by pride, but I see clearly now. The strength of a leader is not in his title, but in his heart." King Eobi studied him for a moment, then turned to face the villagers. A ruler must be wise, not just strong. He must listen before he speaks. He must value his people above himself. He looked back at Obina. "My son has proven that he is worthy." A hush fell over the crowd. Then, the king extended his hand. Obina's breath caught in his throat. He had renounced the throne. He had accepted a life without power. Yet here was his father, offering him a second chance, not as a spoiled prince, but as a man who had earned his place. Slowly, he took his father's hand and rose to his feet. The villagers erupted in cheers. Drums beat in celebration, and voices lifted in song. Children laughed, elders clapped, and the entire village rejoiced. Obina, however, felt no triumph, only gratitude. He had been given a new beginning, a chance to be a different kind of leader. He would not squander it. That night, under the full moon, the village gathered once more at the sacred cave. This time, Obina stood alongside them, not as a skeptic, but as a believer. He bowed deeply before the entrance, offering a gift of gold and fruit to the Golden Serpent, as was tradition. The wind whispered through the trees, and in the shadows, a pair of golden eyes gleamed. The serpent did not appear, but Obina knew it was watching. A lesson had been learned. Respect must always be given to the wisdom of the past. Pride must never blind a man to the truth. And above all, true strength comes not from power, but from humility.